Welcome to Help Me Sara and Dr. Laurie talk about couples and sex. My name is Sara Dimerman, also known as Help Me Sara, and today I'm in conversation with Dr. Laurie Betito. Laurie is a licensed clinical psychologist in Montreal, Canada, with a specialty in sex therapy and has been a practicing psychotherapist for over 25 years. In 1999, she joined Montreal CJAD 800 with her own nightly talk show, Passion, to talk about sex and relationships. This radio show has soared to take the #1 position in its time slot and is the only show of its kind on Montreal Airways. Laurie is also the author of The Sex Bible for People Over 50, a wonderfully written book, which I read myself, and informative with lots of tasteful photographs to illustrate her points. Welcome, Laurie. It's such a pleasure to be chatting with you today. And for our listeners, wanted to mention that this is actually our second phone meeting, and our first was when I interviewed Laurie for my most recent book, Why Married Couples Don't Have Sex, at least not with each other. And I enjoyed chatting with you then and quoting you in my book, which you'll see soon. And I know that today will be equally as informative and enjoyable. So maybe we could begin by chatting about what's normal in the sex department of a relationship, both before and after the age of 50. And maybe before we begin, maybe I could say that when I was researching for my book, I came across many studies, but one of which was from the Kinsey Institute, which is a well-known sex research institute, that concluded that 18 to 29-year-olds have sex an average of 112 times a year. So that's about twice a week. 30 to 39-year-olds an average of 86 times a year, and 40 to 49-year-olds an average of 69 times a year, which is just a little bit more than once a week. So I'm wondering, how about the over 50s?
Probably steady around that time, and it might even start to get more after 50 because of the situation in terms of your life situation, right? So
right. Kids have left home.
40, like in the 30 and 40s, you still got little kids at home, and
right.
Life might be still a little bit crazy. As you get older, you have sometimes more time as a couple without all the distractions of children and all those household duties. So it actually can certainly increase. The only thing is you have to fight through the challenges of menopause and everything else that might dampen at least your spontaneous desire for sex. So we need to talk about that. But when we talk about normal, I hate that word because every couple creates their own normal.
Right.
And what's normal for one isn't necessarily normal for another. And, you can have a couple that have sex regularly on a monthly basis, sometimes, even once every couple of months, and it's good sex. They enjoy everything's good, but neither of them is complaining. In other words, neither of them feel that they want or can more than that at the stage of life they're in. But as long as other things are good in the relationship, meaning that they still find ways to connect.
Right.
You don't have to connect sexually.
Right.
To feel connected to your partner. So,
right.
It's very hard to answer the normal part of it all.
And I know, and when I wrote my first ever book in 2008 called Am I a Normal Parent, normal was obviously a theme of that book. And so I define normal as what's typical. And I think I agree with you 100%. And in fact, in my book, I write that when couples ask me that, like, are we normal? I often say exactly what you said, that what's normal for one person is not normal for another. And so long as they're satisfied, as you just said too, that's the most important part. But I also noticed in your book that you said when it comes to wanting to know what other people are doing, in other words, how do you compare? You mentioned that some of what hinges on how happy a couple is, and I'm quoting from you here, some of what hinges on how happy a couple is about the amount of sex they're having has to do with how much they believe their peers are having. So
right. There's a study that was done looking at that. So if you think that all your friends are having sex every day,
right.
You only have sex once a week, you're looking at yourself as abnormal.
Right.
Okay. So you compare yourself to others. The problem is in our society, people are only the people who get lots of action are talking about it.
Right.
So the people who haven't had sex in a long time or who maybe in a sexless marriage, which is about a quarter of all couples, really,
right,
don't talk about it. So you don't know. So you're only hearing all the people who are, at it.
And I know that the old belief is that if people talk about that they're having it so much, maybe they're not having it as much as they're saying. I don't know how true that is, but
yeah, I'm not sure that is necessarily so true. But I think you reach a certain age where you're not pretending.
Exactly.
You may not say.
Exactly.
You're not going to pretend you're having sex that you're not having.
Right. I think also, I'm sure you'd agree that part of wanting to know whether you're typical is that everybody wants to feel, as you said, like they fit in. They want their experience to be normalized. So they want to be told, they don't want to think that something's wrong with them. But as you said, in the definition of sex in my book, I say that sex in the book is about how much intercourse they're having, because, that's what most men will often complain about, as you said, not getting enough action. But as you also said, sex or sexual intimacy does not have to be just intercourse alone. It could be, hand holding. It could be hugging. It could be massaging each other's feet. It could be just lying and cuddling. As you said, there's so many ways that couples can be intimate other than having intercourse. So often when they're saying, are we normal? They're wanting to know if they're only having sex once a month or less, are they normal? Right. I do know that, in my research, I found that if you're not having sex anymore, then if you're having sex 10 times a year or less, you're living in what's known as a sexless marriage. And unfortunately, I think people who think that they're living in a sexless marriage automatically assume something's wrong with us. And
there's a problem there that this is a label that, here's the number, here's the equal sexless. To me, a sexless marriage is one that has 0. 10 times a year is still on average about once a month. Right. So it depends on the stage of life that they're in. Sometimes they can't get it together to do it once a month because there's so much else going on in their lives, which is a possibility at this particular stage in their life.
Right.
So to label it sexless when they maybe have other things going on, like you say, other forms of sexuality, I don't think it does anybody a service, really. So
I guess what we're both saying is that to spend too much time worrying about what other people are doing in their bedrooms is not a good idea. Rather invest that energy in thinking about whether you as a couple are satisfied with what you have. So, sometimes, as you know better than I, when you get to a certain age, you may just be satisfied with doing other things and then having sex per se once a month, or, not even having to figure it out. So it doesn't have to be that defined. But,
and I think, let's talk about ability, right? So as we get older, we may lose some physical ability. What if your penis doesn't get hard enough for penetration? Does that mean that you should write off all forms of sexuality?
Exactly.
So that was what I was addressing in my book too, because as you get older, there may be issues that prevent you from having intercourse, but it doesn't prevent you from being sexual.
Absolutely. As we said, sexual is not just having intercourse. It could be so many other things.
Right.
And so I guess that leads to maybe discussing sexual desire. Because again, the old, cliche is that women desire sex less than men at any age. It's typically the men who are complaining and the women who are complaining about the men who are hounding them. And, when I looked at some studies, including the global study of sexual attitudes and behaviors, which was conducted in 2005, where they had surveyed almost 14,000 women and 14,000 men, aged 40 to 80 years across the globe, from 29 countries, and they looked at various aspects of sexual problems and relationships. The study found that 26 to 43% of women experienced low sexual desire, compared to only 13 to 28% of men. So this study in particular seemed to confirm the stereotype. But as you and I both know, there are so many reasons for low sexual desire. And you just started talking about, possibly certain physiological problems, maybe even leading to maybe frustration or,
right.
Or maybe leading to, not wanting to try because you're afraid. And the other thing that I suggested in my book is that the possibility that women have different standards. And
that's right. It's the definition. The problem is in the definition.
Of desire?
Of desire. And if you look at that study that looks at 40% plus have problems with desire, that's like half the population. So that to me fits with a norm. It's not that there's a statistic that gets thrown around a lot that 47% of women suffer from some sexual dysfunction.
Right.
When to me, if half the population
right.
fits his definition, that's no longer a dysfunction. It's part of the norm. So somewhere
exactly.
We're losing the definition, and we're only defining it based on how we define men's sexual desire. But if we readjusted that and looked at spontaneous desire, which is that feeling of just being horny and wanting,
right,
and interest in sex, that number would be would grow much, much smaller. So when women come to me or couples come to me and they say, hey, my wife doesn't want sex. I want it all the time. She doesn't want it. We're incompatible. And I ask her, okay, well, tell me, when you engage in sex, are you enjoying it? Is your body responsive?
Right.
Do you want to continue? And inevitably they always say, oh yeah, I love having sex. I love sex. It's great. Everything's great. But I don't often feel like it. So in other words, their partners are wondering, why is she horny? Why doesn't she want to rip my clothes off? And why
right.
isn't she,
Right.
And that's the spontaneous desire that's lacking. But the interest is still there. She wants to. She wants to engage in something that's fun for her. She wants to feel pleasure too.
Right.
You just have to understand how to get from point A to point B, which is a different way how men get to point A to point B. They're already at point B.
Right.
So they don't need much.
Exactly.
Women need so much more.
So you're talking about like mood setting and not just expecting that because you roll over to your partner's side of the bed and touch her that she's going to automatically rise to the occasion as a man would.
Well, that's precisely it. She requires more to put her in a position where she wants to engage.
Yeah, and once she's engaged, as you said, when she's engaged, she enjoys it. And even when you think of, you say to women, well, do you masturbate? And many women will say yes, but I don't have sex. I masturbate more than I have sex, in fact, which again proves what you're saying, that women, in my experience too, in my research and having talked to couples myself, I agree with you that it's not that women desire sex less than men. It's just that they require a different approach in order to get them to that point B.
Exactly.
And also,
I often use the analogy of the gym.
Right.
Going to the gym. Now, I don't know about you, but I personally, to get up at 5:30 in the morning to get myself to the gym,
right,
is
a chore.
No, it's not something. It feels like a chore. I don't have much desire to go. I have desire to go to the gym because I want to work out and look good, but I lack the motivation necessarily to get up and go, to get up that early and get myself there. But once I'm there, once I set it in my mind, I am going come hell or high water. I go to the gym. Once I'm there and I start working out, I'm loving it.
Yeah.
And then after I'm done the workout, I say, wow, this was great. I got to come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, because I know, that felt good and I can see the results and everything's great. So what women are missing more than anything is that get up and go. So then it becomes a choice and a decision you make. But if the conditions are not right for that choice or decision to be made, if I look outside and there's a huge snowstorm,
right,
I'm not going to go outside.
Right.
I've just had a huge fight with my partner yesterday. I am not going to want to be open to be sexual.
Right. Now you also mentioned that, once women start, they typically enjoy it. And I know that to be true.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's also the other side where I think that what I was mentioning earlier is that women have different standards. And I think men are more likely to have sex. And I hate to use a stereotype, but I believe it's true that, men, it doesn't take as much for a man to get aroused and it doesn't, like, once his penis is erect, he's ready to have sex. It's not so much of what goes on in his head. Whereas I think for women, sometimes they're not having good sex. And why would they want to continue to have sex when the experience is not positive?
Right. Well, the complaint that they have most often is that they feel their partner is taking from them. And
right.
when they're having
not giving.
Sex, they're doing it for them.
Right.
Not taking, so the women need to take responsibility for their sexuality and to take sex, and then it becomes a give and take.
Right.
Rather than feel like they're always giving.
Right.
Because women give all day, every day.
Yeah.
And they're not interested in giving anymore. So what's the dissatisfaction is that their partner thinks everything is okay because they've decided, okay, fine, just, shut them up like it's the pity.
Get it over and done with.
Yeah. And then, but eventually guys, as men get older, they're not interested in that.
Right.
Their main interest is to pleasure their partner.
Right.
And they want their partner to be enjoying it just as much as they are.
Absolutely. And I know in my book I write quite a bit about how men feel too, and how they may feel over time unloved, rejected, undesired as well, and the impact that may not impact on them wanting to have sex or being able to have sex, unless there's something physiologically inhibiting them, but it does affect the connection, right? The emotional connection. Which man? Well, most men don't want to force themselves on their partners. They want to be wanted.
That's right. They don't. Eventually, that gets very old and tiresome, and it's not. They want their partner to really, really desire them, which puts them at risk, of course, for affairs, because with someone on the outside, that's what they will experience.
Exactly, and it's not. And as we know, with affairs, it's not just the physical that they're looking at, but they're meeting somebody who's suddenly engaged with them, interested, right. For both men and women, and that's often why affairs happen. Just to go back to something you said earlier about, how once people become a little older and they don't have the same kinds of responsibilities of younger children and rushing around with crazy schedules and that kind of stuff, they maybe can, work on or ease into or enjoy their sexual relationship better. But I'm sure you'd agree that if there's been many, many years where there's been no work, where there's been no kind of connecting with one another, where it's all being focused on the kids, for example, then that may be a difficult transition. It's not as if your kids leave home and all of a sudden you're horny for one another.
Let's do it.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
no, you're right. There's a transition in it, and part of it is rediscovering each other and building slowly. You don't just go into having sex on a daily basis. You go into building intimacy because you've lost the connection. You've lost each other. So you need to spend time just hanging out naked in bed, just massaging. How about just kissing?
Right.
It is amazing to me how many couples I've spoken to where kissing doesn't exist in their relationship.
Right.
I spoke to a couple, and they're not old. They're like early 40s. They hadn't kissed in 10 years.
Really?
They don't even kiss when they have intercourse, or I hesitate to use the word make love.
Right.
So that's a problem.
Because making love would imply kissing, right?
Well, yes, exactly. That's one of the most loving things you do with a partner is kissing. So couples who have no kissing, what is it? Just stick it in and out. It's done. Goodbye.
Well, in my book, I talk about the boundary game, and I know I'm not, I may have worded it differently, but I know that it's not unique to me, what I'm saying. But, going back to those basics and maybe having a few, occasions where you kind of set these boundaries for one another, almost like the forbidden fruit, and just really enjoy just a part of the person's body. So maybe it's just the face, nothing from the neck down. Whereas you said you're almost going back to your teen age, maybe,
that's right.
Where you're just making out and,
that's right.
and remembering how that heavy kissing got you all excited.
That's right.
But as you said, if you don't have that, it's hard to really get turned on. And, I'd like to talk maybe about some of the reasons that we've both found that contribute to people not wanting or able to have sex with their long-term partners. And I know we talked about kids, but, even when
there's one you wrote about, which is an amazing one, is women who feel that they're mothering their their husbands.
Right. So how can I be your lover how can I be your lover when I'm too busy being your mother?
Your mother, yeah.
Is absolutely who wants to have, who wants to be intimate with somebody that they perceive in that kind of role. And I think that talks a lot about, if you lose respect for your partner, which I think women do when they feel that they have to mother them, then that of course creates all these negative emotions. And in my book, I talk a lot about, the emotions and how they get in the way. Anger, resentment, frustration, boredom is one of them, but maybe that's not an emotion. But all the anger and resentment and the things that build up and are very, very hard to put aside when your partner wants to be intimate. Because I think women, again, stereotype, but it's true that women have a much more difficult time compartmentalizing and putting aside the argument that they even had 2 days ago.
That's right. I mean, not to say that I've met plenty of men, too, who have that same difficulty, but generally, if it comes to sex, they are more able to put that aside and try to even fix it through intercourse, through sex. Because
right.
for men, sex is a signifier that, everything's okay.
Right. Maybe it's a makeup.
We're going to be okay.
Right. Right.
Right. Whereas women, no, that isn't what does it for them. They need to hear the "I'm sorry." They need to have the actions that speak louder in terms of, and the words that go with it, rather than just let's have sex.
And in fact, that communication, that heavy talk, can be a great form of foreplay, right?
Of course,
because
that's what they're asking for. That's what women want: is be nice to me, just treat me like a princess,
Right.
Talk to me in that way, and this will turn me on.
Right. Or just even pillow talk, just talking about things that have gone on during the day or catching up with one another. I think feeling that kind of connection with one another can be a great form of foreplay. And I think even over 50, because you mentioned about kids growing up, and I know that, but over 50, because I'm in that category, and, now the kids are grown up, but now I'm caring for my parents,
right.
So.
Stuck in that middle, right.
That sandwich generation, right? So I think regardless of what age you're at, it requires work, not just the sex, but everything that leads up to the sex, because in fact the sex is kind of the cherry on the top, right?
Exactly. I always call it the icing on the cake. It's the icing's delicious, but the cake should be good too, without the icing.
Exactly. You got to have a good recipe. You got to really have the ingredients and make the proper mix and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely. And then when all that is there, then you can put the icing on top. One of the things that I wrote about, in fact, my very first chapter on the real reasons why couples are not having sex, aside from all the excuses that we come up with, is about, the chapter's called Don't Look at Me. The whole topic of, weight, especially for women. And in fact, I attended a weight loss group that was specific for men. And it was really interesting just to be with a group of men. It was actually an evening where the women were invited. So I took my husband along as kind of the man, who may have been there to listen. And I was the spouse because I didn't want people to be afraid to talk. And it was really interesting hearing men's perspective on weight and how it affects their sex lives. But I think especially for women, not wanting to be seen naked due to weight issues, due to stretch marks from birth. And then, I'm sure you'd know more about this than me in terms of the age changes,
yes.
Changes to our body over time. What have you found in that regard?
Besides that everything goes south.
Exactly.
And you have a hard time keeping the weight off.
Exactly.
Right. And it's hard. It takes a lot more effort to stay in shape, and it takes a lot less calories before this is all part of the aging process, but, and there are things that happen to us sexually too. There are things that happen to our genitals as we age too. We just have to be aware of all of this and work with it rather than fight it so hard.
Right.
And learn to accept that these are changes that will happen. Like last night, I was looking in the mirror and I looked under my eyes. I said, and my husband was in the room and I said, oh my goodness, look at this wrinkle. I said, there must be something wrong. And he looked at me and goes,
you're tired.
Honey, you're over 50. Like, those wrinkles are going to come out. And I'm like, not now.
Not me. Everybody else, but not me.
Yeah, why just out of the blue, And he's looking at me like, it's okay, hon, you're 50.
So he's more accepting of you than you are of you.
That's the thing, is when I talk to men, I look at men and women, and some women are thinking, I hate my body and I don't want to be naked. And they're like, oh my God, don't look at that part of your body. I love it. And they're not looking.
I know.
They're not judging your body.
It's true. And I think, you talk about weight and I know that over a certain age, it's a lot harder to lose weight, but the weight, at least we have somewhat more in our own control. I mean, unless we go and have reconstructive surgery, our breasts are going to sag and our genitals are going to become more flabby. And, there's going to be changes that we can't quick fix as much as we can going to the gym and cutting back on calories. And I think, as you said, there's something, when I look at my husband and I think there's something really kind of nice about accepting those aging changes in one another and kind of growing old together type of thing.
Right.
As much as I'd like to be young forever, I think if you can, if it must be so nice for a man to say that to a woman, or for a woman to hear, I love you just the way you are. I'm over 50, you're over 50. Let's just accept and enjoy. And as you said, work with it as opposed to fight it. So maybe you can talk, about some of those physiological changes. I know, we hear about them. Can you just speak briefly about that? About some of those?
Sure. Well, some of the changes for women, vaginal changes anyway, because of the less estrogen being produced, obviously the biggest problem is vaginal dryness for women.
Right.
And the vaginal dryness, if they're not aware of what's going on and they don't moisturize their vaginas with some form of treatment,
right,
whether it be hormonal, non-hormonal, what have you, they just need to keep it moisturized. The problem is the vagina, the lining is thin, so it cracks. It's like tissue paper. It becomes like that really, really thin paper, and it's much more prone to little fissures, little cuts.
Right.
That causes a lot of pain.
Right.
With intercourse, and then women start avoiding all kinds of intercourse because of that. So,
or they're afraid to even start kissing because they're anticipating the pain of what might happen next.
Exactly. So we have to treat that. That's the very first thing that has to be treated, would be that the vaginal dryness, and understanding that, where at one time arousal was tied into lubrication, now you can feel aroused but not lubricate enough.
Right.
So always using an external lubricant is really important. That's one of the major problems for women in terms of their sexual functioning. That's really it.
Right.
And obviously other things are happening. We're talking about the body image, and we're talking about sometimes a lower drive, sometimes a higher drive. I'm speaking to a lot of women over 50 that have never had more drive than they do now.
Really?
Yeah, and that also lubricate a lot more than they ever have.
And how do they account for that? Is that physiological, or is that just psychological, do you think?
I think it's a mixture. I really think it's really a mixture, and I think some women who are on hormone replacement therapy experience more desire, and but everybody has to weigh that for themselves.
Right, exactly.
That's part of it. So women are in fact less affected by the changes than men are, because they can still be functional, right? Even if they have these changes, they can lubrication, and they can have penetration.
Right.
Then though, when you're dealing with erectile dysfunction, is can be obviously a problem for penetration. However, I think a lot of people assume that as you get older, it's inevitable. Like, you're all going to experience erectile dysfunction, and really, only about a quarter of men require help, require medication to help them with their ED, because it's a normal part. Like, every man is going to experience it at some point. Their erections are never going to be as firm.
Right.
Maybe except in the morning.
Right.
And, that's just a reality. It takes them longer. For both men and women, it takes longer to achieve the same level of arousal. So
right.
They need more direct stimulation. Women, more direct stimulation to the clitoris. Men, more direct stimulation to the penis.
Right.
To get to the same level. Men at one time when they were younger could, like you said, could think about sex, and boom, they've got an erection.
Right.
As they get older, you need to touch it to get there.
Right. And of course, if all the other things are not in place, like if there's dissatisfaction in the relationship, or there's a lot of unresolved anger, then you're not going to want to spend that time. You're going to want to just get it over and done with, so you can tick it off your chore list. So takes me back to how important it is to communicate and get help and go to workshops and learn how to become more connected to one another.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what it is. It's connecting to one another more than anything else, and getting through the resentment. Like, if you don't identify, you can't just come for help and say, we have different, I don't feel like having sex, give me a pill, fix me.
Right.
And without finding out, okay, what is
what's the root cause?
What has stopping, and some of these couples have long histories of, and lists and lists of resentment.
Yeah, absolutely. And boredom. We didn't talk about boredom. I think how can a relationship of 20 years compare to a relationship that's just started out? I mean, and when I talk about infidelity in my book, I talk about that there's absolutely no way that you can compete with a new relationship.
That's right. I mean, you cannot compete with a new relationship. It is absolutely impossible. The new relationship will always win. And
that's why even couples that are, so-called happily married and pretty functional are susceptible to infidelity because, as I just said, and as you agreed, there's nothing that can compare. I mean, just even hormonally and chemically, right? So, it's you can't compete even if you try. Having said that, you want to make sure that your relationship is as intact as possible, so that any inclination to want to get into another relationship might be thought about, 2 or 3 times, because the primary relationship is a pretty good one.
Exactly, and you're talking about, it's not just feeling that charge, but you're thinking of the consequence of that.
Right.
Short-lived charge.
Well, in the book, because it's a lot of the book that I've just written is about infidelity, it's about, looking at what the risks versus the benefits are, and recognizing that, you may risk losing your entire relationship and family as you know it, for the sake of having your sexual energy charged,
That's right.
So,
it's when I give my talks, I talk about, one of the myths, of course, is that as men get older, they fear dying from, during sex. They feel like it's too much for their heart.
Right.
That they'll have a heart attack. But only about 1% of men will have a heart attack, will die while having sex. And of that 1%, over 70% are having sex with their mistress.
Yeah, interesting. So it's the fear of the dying comes up only when they're with their wives.
Well, no, it's not that the fear of dying comes up with their wives. Their actual death will be
when they're having
sex with the mistress, not with their wife.
Okay, I get it. That's interesting.
The stress of being with the wife is the stress of being with the mistress is what's killing them, not the sex.
The guilt, maybe.
The guilt, the stress, whatever it is, something else.
You talked earlier about, how when you go to a gym, you're motivated to go back because you understand the benefits of being there. You're being healthier, you're looking better. What about the physical and emotional well-being that results from having sex at any age, really? What have you found in terms of, one of the things that I write about is, is it really true that you lose it if you don't use it, kind of thing?
There is some truth to that, yes. There's definitely some truth to use it or lose it, because we know that regular sexual activity keeps your genitals younger.
Right.
And it keeps you in shape. So if we look at the vagina as a muscle, let's say,
right.
If we don't use it anymore, if we're not generating blood flow to the area, that is going to atrophy.
Right.
Same way that if I put my arm in a cast and I leave the cast on for 2 months and then I take off the cast, the arm in a cast is going to be much smaller than the arm that hasn't been in a cast. It's been being used, right?
Right.
So there's an atrophy to that, for sure. That's normal.
So that's that's the physical. What about the emotional well-being?
Well, there's a list of a whole chapter on there's a huge list of benefits. I don't know any negatives, only benefits to regular sex, besides keeping you relaxed, less irritable, emotionally connected,
right.
You live longer, you look younger.
Right.
There's a study done that saw women or people who had regular sex looked 7 years younger than their actual age.
Wow.
So that, so there's, and it just makes you feel vibrant. There's so many benefits in terms of your immune system, In terms of your cardiac health, it's a bit of a workout, so that is helpful.
So is this something that somebody could use against their partner? Like, honey, if we don't have good regular sex, then I'm going to have to get it somewhere else because I need to look 7 years younger.
Well, no, because you can still masturbate and achieve the same result.
Okay, that's the good comeback line.
Go ahead.
Well, maybe not quite as much, right? Because I think there is something about the physical connection. But I think when you are having sex outside of your relationship, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, there's a whole lot of other issues that emerge. Hopefully, as a human being, you feel some sort of guilt and remorse and, and there's other stressors by doing that too, right?
Yes, that are much more, that's right, they're going to have much more of an effect on your psyche and
that's
everything
right.
else.
They may kind of outweigh the benefits.
Pardon?
They may kind of